So the simple matter of the fact is, whether we're in a cave or living out in the open, the closer we come together as men and women, because of our own insecurities, which is another matter, there's aggressive tendencies that survive, kill or be killed instinct that's deep-seated in us. Comes out and we want to protect ourselves. Guys that were a lot smarter than most of the men and women, more of the ruling class, more of the kings of the villages, a long time ago realized that if they could get people out of the written code, the basic code of love your brothers as you would yourself, the 10 Commandments, so to speak, if they could get them out of their code, they could control them. They could make a lot of money out of them. But in order to do that, they figured, well, the easiest way to do this, rather than beating them into submission, is to entice them. Entice them and get them to volunteer. Volunteer into their own system that they created for the enslavement of men. So that's where we got these zoning codes when we first moved out of the cave. That's where we got all the regulations about where you could have your outhouse, where you could have your chickens, how many chickens you could have, where you could go fishing, when you could go fishing, when you could hang your laundry up. There are so many codes and regulations, just taking North America as a sample, that many judges have admitted that it's impossible for any man in law to know all of the law. And it's more like it would take any man in law the rest of his life trying to find out all the law, and still he would have to admit that he did not know all the law. So when I say, can we improve on the 10 Commandments? Well, it seems to be quite obvious that 10 is a dramatic improvement over 10 minutes. Especially when the 10, if followed, result in no need for the other 999,999,001. No, 90, 90, pardon me. So when you have such a glaring, obvious discrepancy between which at one time worked really good, people found out that if you didn't follow that 10 Commandments written in stone, pretty soon the stone was heading your direction. Because that was the primitive way, you know, when we're small and we're young and learning. Sometimes primitive things like pain are great teachers. And it seems to be the Old Testament indicates that if you didn't follow those 10 Commandments back then, that were written in stone, the stone would come chasing you and likely stone you to death. I'm not saying I promote that. I believe that particular punishment has been washed away and that it's up to God to deliver punishment. But that's just my view. I'm not here to dispense that. I'm here more to give you some facts about how we got to where we were, or pardon me, where we are from where we were in the cave, up until the point where I was talking about the Queen and the oath when he entered in here. My main purpose here is to make you understand that there is a way out of this, an honorable way out of this. But first of all, like I said, you have to know a little bit about what went on in the past. Why we have such extensive rules today as opposed to the 10 Commandments that the Christian monarch, the Queen, still defends, with all of her power, I might add. In 1953, she swore with all of her power that she would defend the laws of God. So when you have somebody in front of 50 million people, and that was the televised viewer count at that time, in 1953, 50 million people watching TV. When you have that many people seeing a Christian monarch promise to uphold the laws of God with all of her power, you would think that one or two would be asking her to when they felt that the laws of God were being infringed upon. Well, if that has ever taken place, and legitimately so, it would appear that either the media hasn't felt it important enough to report on, or Her Majesty never brought it to the attention of her subjects. In either case, it seems to be evident that because of most people's awareness of something wrong with our system, there's corruption within it, politicians going to jail, politicians accused of illicit affairs, politicians accused of laundering money, stealing money. The list goes on and on of the corruption that's within our system. So if we find out that there's false oaths involved, as I started off with, you have a very, very good choice to make. Because anybody that finds out that something that's been achieved has been achieved by fraud, they are not just speculating on it, but they've got rock, hard, I throw water on you, you're wet type evidence. Now you've got something that you can stand as a white knight, so to speak, a savior. Let's get it right, and I've got all the glory behind me in doing it. I can never be wrong on this one. That's the kind of position this puts anybody in if they believe in the facts that they're showing. A lot of people don't want to believe in them because they're so stark. Nonetheless, they're real.
Trying to get a sense of the practical elements of all this stuff, like one question that I did have was, does the Queen still have power?
The Queen has the power that the people give her. It's a very good question. The Queen has the power that the people give her. And if you give her the power to sit back and do nothing, that's because people are not asking for her to defend the faith. That's the only power the Queen has since 1931, and her father before her wrote the Statute of Westminster, which is a document basically cutting loose all of the Commonwealth countries from the law-making authority of the British Commonwealth. The House of Commons made all of the laws for the Commonwealth countries before 1931. After 1931, the King cut them loose. It's very interesting that that happened around 1931 because it was after the 1929 stock market crash. All of the Commonwealth countries were bankrupt. And the creditors, being international bankers, were at the door looking for their money. And they'd come to the palace because the king had dominion over all of those countries. So the king, being a wise king, said, well, just a minute now, those countries have broken the law and entered into usurious contracts, in other words, paying interest on loans, which is usury, violation of God's law. And he said, I'm going to Westminster for advice. And he went to the Westminster Council, the bishops and the high clergy of Westminster, and consulted with them, and they drafted up the Statute of Westminster in 1931, where the king wrote off all the responsibility for writing the laws for those countries, and they were on their own. And there was only one authority that he was leaving behind, his royal style. Well, what that meant is he was leaving behind the King James Bible and his duty to defend it. In other words, if anybody's ability to practice their faith and beliefs